Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. The ruling party in Tamil Nadu, the DMK, has moved the Supreme Court against the special intensive revision of the electoral rolls presently underway in the state. That is the big issue we shall focus on today. What are the DMK's main concerns? Is it right in claiming the SIR exercise is anti-democratic and against the interests of the people of the state? And how confident is the party it will get relief from the Supreme Court? Those are the questions I shall raise in this interview with Tamil Nadu's Minister for Information Technology and Digital Services, P. Thiaga Rajan. Mr. Thiagarajan, your party, the DMK, has moved the Supreme Court against the special intensive revision of the electoral rolls presently underway in Tamil Nadu. For the benefit of those viewers who haven't attentively followed the story, what are your concerns about the SIR exercise?
Well, first, thank you for inviting me and thank you for giving me this opportunity. I would say always when you have concerns, you have to see them in context. So I'm just going to set the context and I'll elaborate later if you want. But the primary context is the overall lack of independence of the Election Commission and the increasing decay in its independence over the last few years. So at face value, the Election Commission's actions are always kind of not inspiring confidence. Second, the example of what happened in Bihar with over 65 lakh people removed from the rolls and the allegations that there were targeted removals adds to our concern. Third, and probably the most important, the timing of this exercise is very suspicious. It is hardly 4 months, maybe 3 months from the calling of the Model Code of Conduct for the 26 assembly elections. And given the amount of work that needs to be done for around 6.5 crore voters to be validated, the time just doesn't seem right. It's not realistic to get it done. So we worry whether this is again an opportunity, misused opportunity, or attempt to disenfranchise voters.
Okay, but within that context, what are your key concerns?
Well, the start is that the process requires every single voter to be revalidated, right? I mean, that's what an SIR is. And as many have argued, SIRs have occurred before, and this is not the first and won't be the last. But just to describe the process itself, it requires for 6.5 crore people forms to be printed, for these forms to be taken to the individual's houses for validation that these people exist in that house. Then, depending on the category of voter you are and your pre-qualifications under certain criteria, it might be a relatively easier or a relatively more complex process. And all this has to be done within 30 days at the head count of an average of one individual who is a state government employee, usually of a lower level of function. On a part-time basis, they are not given off from their day job. And therefore, the ratio is one human being to go and validate 1,000 voters. Now, the average family size in Tamil Nadu is about 3 point something, of which you take out the children, all that is probably under 2.5 voters per house. So now, for 1,000 people, these individuals have to visit 400 houses. And the requirement is that you must go 3 times to see if they are there. And if they are there, then they have to go through the process, which is a relatively cumbersome process. You have to have a new photograph, you have to show some documents, you have to fill out the forms, etc., which are not trivial. And to fill out the forms, you have to know which category of voter you are, whether you're a voter who was already validated in the previous SIR done 20 or more years ago, depending on where you live. In the urban areas, it was done 2005. In the rural areas, the last published list is 2002. So the process is so cumbersome, and to have one human being have to do 1,000 voters, which is about 400 houses, in a limited time on a part-time basis, and then subject to 2 other issues, as with other things in this government, the process is announced and then the printing of the paper starts. So the actual forms were not printed till after the process started, and only after November 4th we're starting to see the forms flow. Now the Election Commission claims something like 90% have been handed over to these BLOs, as they call booth level officers, but it's already 20 days or 18 days into the process. And the second is the level of training provided to them is woefully inadequate. Now, there's a third component, which is on the back end. Once these forms have been received, they have to be uploaded into a computerized system, which is again an EC system. And that process is now having all kinds of new issues where those servers crash and they're not able to load them as they would like. And so you have this like process that is creaking. And as of yesterday, for example, in my constituency, where I've been intensively on the ground and training and supporting people, we have got maybe 12% of the voters uploaded into the computer system that the form has gone out and come back. And we have maybe 70% of the forms in the hands of the BLOs, though the Election Commission claims it's 90. And this process now has only about 12 or 13 days left. So these are our concerns.
Now, in the all-party meeting held on the 3rd of November, when it was decided that the Supreme Court would be petitioned, the meeting claimed the SIR exercise was an anti-democratic exercise, and secondly, that it went against the interests of the people of Tamil Nadu. Given that the Election Commission's intention is to purify the rolls, make them more accurate and more truly representative of the voters, on what grounds does your party believe that this is an undemocratic exercise and that it's against the interests of the people of Tamil Nadu?
Look, as they used to say in the markets, timing is everything, right? If you ask me, I've spent probably more time than most looking into this for various reasons. Broadly, the system of electoral function and its components. And you may recall about a year ago, 18 months ago, around March of 2024, I wrote a detailed essay about 12 pages long in the Frontline magazine. At that time, showing already that the Election Commission, and if I recall right, the title was something like, is it merely incompetence or is it actual malintent? So I'd already pointed out serious amount of flaws and one-side game played by the Election Commission. So in that sense, I would say, if the profound question is, are the roles in need of revision? The answer is absolutely so. If the question then is this the time to do it? The question is absolutely not. If the election is coming in 3-4 months, if you start a process so late that has so many weaknesses in the process, you're likely to disenfranchise voters because the process is not that effective or functional to process that many people in this little time. Now I'll go one step further. Why is it anti-democratic? Because, of course, the right to vote is the core kind of privilege of any citizen in democracy. The notion of one person, one vote lies at the heart of democracy. And if you remove that right from them, then it's anti-democratic. And why is there a risk of that right being removed? Again, it's just logic. The possibility of somebody getting their form, filling it out, submitting it, and ensuring it gets uploaded obviously increases as a function of education, of economic circumstances, of connectivity to the system, of awareness. And therefore, in reverse, those who are most likely to get left out, as I'm seeing in my constituency when I go around, are the poorest, economically weakest, least connected to media or digital systems, and therefore have to actually work and wait for this human being to come at a time when they are home and they're not working somewhere else, and so the door is not locked. So the process is inclined towards affluent, educated, connected people having higher likelihood of being included, and therefore inclined against the opposite being included. Therefore, it's also anti-democratic.
Tell me, how much of your concern arises out of the fact that the SIR exercise is being conducted in Tamil Nadu just when the northeast monsoon will be hitting its peak?
Well, that's kind of the added complexity. I would, let me be 100% clear. Even if it was not the northeast monsoon, my understanding of operations management and my understanding of the logistical complications required and my experience on the field, I've been now in the field for maybe 10 days, is that this exercise was not likely to be done in 30 days, even if not a single raindrop fell. Now you add in the complexity of the monsoons, and in the past, as you've seen, the monsoons can get quite volatile. As you know, Tamil Nadu and particularly places like Chennai, we get something like 80% of our annual rainfall in the retreating monsoon, in the northeast monsoon. So that could add much more complexity. And in our so-called age of digital India, all these forms are paper printed forms. With, of course, they have a QR code, but then the paper printed forms. So the paper printed forms will get damaged further if there's a lot of rain and there's a lot of issues. So, of course, profoundly, fundamentally, I say that this timing is not enough. The space given is not enough.
Okay.
Now you add in the complexity of for phase one, the monsoons, and for phase two, after the first published list, the next 30 days, the monsoons plus Christmas, plus the New Year and all that stuff. Then I start having, much more kind of deeper concerns.
Let me quote what R.S. Bharti, your party, the DMK's organizing secretary, said when he moved the Supreme Court against the SIR on the 3rd of November. He said, and I'm quoting him, the SIR is effectively functioning as a de facto national register of citizens. That's not a point you've made so far yourself. Do you agree with him?
Yeah, I mean, listen, he has stated what I think is the official position of the party. I certainly am a follower of the party, and he is talking at a much more profound level. I am on the ground as a member of the Legislative Assembly. I'm not talking as a spokesperson for the party here. I'm speaking as a citizen, a member representing the people and operating in my constituency. I'm not in in any official capacity in the party, at least related to this. I'm in some other post. So my points are mostly around the operational constraints. Now, if I start looking at the legal issues or the other bigger issues, then I ask 2-3 questions. Historically, these have been done right after a census. So there's a corresponding data set from which the government can also refer, at least to benchmark. Am I catching enough people? Not. Here is a government that is for, either deeply malintent reasons or sheer incompetence, not done the census that was supposed to be done 2021, and we are many years past COVID. They have not announced it till it suits them from a redistricting perspective. So the first issue is it's not done as past SIRs have been done, usually correlated to a census. Second issue is if you had that much concern about the quality of the voter roll, surely after 10 years, whether the census was done or not, you could have done this SIR. There's no need to wait 20 years for a SIR. Then the next concern is that at this point, if you do a SIR without any cross-reference, it is harder for people to appeal if they have kind of gross violations. So you're operating in a blank, and this becomes the primary data set with no other cross-reference. So you put all of that together, as with everything else that this government has done, our concern is that the timing reeks of, callousness at best and sheer malintent at worst, and more likely malintent.
Let me ask you a pointed question at this moment. When the exercise happened in Bihar, the suspicion was that it was intended to eliminate Muslims and perhaps more generally opposition voters. What's your suspicion in Tamil Nadu? Is there a specific section of the population the SIR is perhaps intended to eliminate?
Look, I can't cast aspersions on individuals who are doing the work. In theory, from a hypothetical perspective, the people doing the work are the employees of the state government. And if there is a government influence, it's more likely to be the state government than the federal government, because most people don't realize the election commission is more a kind of notional body than a practical operating body. They do bad things in design and bad things in intent, but the execution, as you know, for example, I'll just put this in context. The election commission has, a few hundred full-time employees. They set a lot of policies. They can change the world. They can change the country. They can destroy democracy, but they have a few hundred employees. To operate even this SIR will require maybe 70,000 people. To operate a full-blown election in the state of Tamil Nadu, this is just for the state of Tamil Nadu, will require probably, I don't know, 150 to 200,000 people to be working to execute the election. And at most, a few thousand of those will be deputed from out of state to come and do this oversight and other things. So, in effect, it is the state government that has to operate the machinery to do whether it's SIR or electoral roll. Therefore, if you tell me the state government also has a bias towards fundamentalism, has a bias towards right wing, has a bias against certain minorities, then I have greater concern. In Tamil Nadu, the malintent may be directed one way or the other, but the execution, it is our bounden duty as the state government, and we will, do it at all costs to ensure that it is not targeted. My worry is not targeted exclusion in Tamil Nadu. In Bihar, it may have been. I don't know. I don't live there. But in Tamil Nadu, my worry is unintentional or intentional exclusion of the weakest people, of the poorest people, of those who have the least recourse to getting it corrected if they have a problem. And that is just the sheer scale of the operation and the time given for it.
Let me raise another issue with you. In critical respects, the SIR exercise being presently conducted in Tamil Nadu is different to what happened in Bihar earlier this year. First, voters don't have to fill in enumeration forms. The BLO will do that for them. Second, they don't have to provide documents unless it's asked of them, and that will only be after the initial stage. How much comfort do you take from these two changes, because they've been presented by the Election Commission as fundamental learnings from the Bihar experience? Will they make the exercise smoother and easier in Tamil Nadu?
Yeah, as my party colleague and lawyer and senior lawyer and member of the Rajya Sabha, Thiru N.R. Ilango, has pointed out, these are both double-edged swords, because on the one hand, if you could get the form from anywhere and fill it out, it allowed people to effectively have multiple channels of in and out. Now you have got one human being, one part-time employee, state government, usually Anganwadi staffer or low-level staff in the education department or the municipal administration department. That individual is the bottleneck for 1,000 forms to go out and come back. And that individual has to personally, individually validate every single human being of this 1,000 people. That is a huge bottleneck. Just think about, trying to push an elephant through a eye hole of a needle. The second point you say is, if the certificates are not required, it will be interesting to see. Let us say that prima facie 80% or 90% of those who are able to show all these easy categories. I was a voter in 2005, or my parents, I'm an urban area, so the list is 2005, and the rural it's a 2002 list. So let's just take for my constituency 2005. I was a voter in 2005, or my parents were a voter in 2005, or I have one of the documents. Therefore, the BLO validates it, takes it. Now let's say that we will know on November 4th or December 4th or December 8th or whenever they publish it, whether this has been a realistic exercise. My own fear and instinct is that it will show huge lacunae. It will show lots of people, like the fill percentage on the electronic forms. If the number is anything less than 85, then my fears will have been well founded. So the point then is, if you don't have to show the document now, and for whatever reason the form gets rejected, therefore after December 4th, when December 8th or whenever the publication happens, if you go to phase 2, now to phase 2, you have to actually go to the central office of the election authority of your constituency, carrying your documents with you, and start as if you are doing a de novo registration of a vote, as if you're the first time voter. And there the bar may be set very high. So in theory, it could be easier, it could be better, but it also could be worse, particularly the bottleneck of one human being processing 1,000 voters, which is the average number of voters in a booth.
I get the clear impression, Mr. Thiagarajan, that the fundamental problem is you don't trust the Election Commission. You have grave doubts, if not suspicions, about its functioning and even about its intent.
Yeah, I don't think that's new. And I think that existed before SIR. I've written about it very clearly. And over the years, the skew of the Election Commission has kept on becoming more and more visible and more blatant, right? From the look over the years, right? They have kept on reducing the transparency. They used to give us machine readable data. Now they don't give us that. They used to give access to the CCTV footage and have it around for a while that if you go to case, you could do it. Now they don't do that. There used to be a clear system where the Chief Justice was one of the three people nominating the CEC. The government changed the law to make it two union ministers and took away that aspect of independence. Then they brought in the amendments to the act that said you cannot prosecute them for anything they might have done as an election commissioner, even if it's an egregious violation of democracy. That's another way to give them bias. Then you look at the way they do timing of everything, from the timing of elections to the timing of, number of phases to who is allowed to do what. I pointed out in 2024. Just hear me on this one example. 2024 Lok Sabha election is happening. In the Lok Sabha election, on the model code of conduct, the state ministers were not allowed to use our offices to fly our flags, our constituency offices, not allowed to use the flag on our car, not allowed to keep our escorts. We were basically told that this is election mode. You should go as if you're a normal citizen. Fair enough, no problem. The Prime Minister was flying around in a multi-helicopter convoy doing canvassing all over the country. How is that a valid approach to a neutral or level playing field? So I'm saying it is sheer experience over the last, 5-8 years that, and I could give you many more examples. But every single time the Election Commission has shown that it is more brazen than in the past in being one-sided. So, of course, I start, and again I say it's not new. I've written a long essay, and the title was, is it mere incompetence or is it malintent? And I gave an interview where I said, this might be the lowest point of our democracy as far as the Election Commission is concerned. It has never been less trusted and less neutral, less perceived to be fair than it is now.
You've explained.
And they've sunk lower in the last year. They've sunk lower than that. Just when I thought they couldn't go any lower, they've gone lower than that.
You've explained at great length why you have concerns, both about the intent of the Election Commission as well as the procedure that's being adopted to carry out the SIR exercise. You've explained your fears. You've explained how the poorest, the least capable of defending themselves will be the people most likely to be eliminated from the rolls. How hopeful are you that against this background, you will get relief from the Supreme Court?
Well, again, I'm not the right person to state the party's view because the party has many distinguished lawyers and we are already represented in the court in an actual active suit. So it might be a bit presumptuous of me to say, anything about it. But I'll say it a different way, if you don't mind. In a few days, we will know whether our fears were founded or not. In a few days, we will know what is the actual percentage. You might have also heard, just to put this in true depth for your viewers, all over, wherever they're trying to do these SIRs, a lot of these BLOs have come under great mental stress. A few of them have committed suicide. In Tamil Nadu, they went on strike. They had a strike saying, you're asking us to do what is not humanly possible. So it's not just that it's a hypothetical, the people in the field doing the work. In my constituency, we've had to request multiple BLOs to be changed because they don't actually have the capacity to do the work, and so they haven't been coming. And so we can't let the system fail. But my point is, after all of this, come December 4th, the truth will be evident to everybody. Because if the proportion of voters that have been validated by December 4th under the so-called relaxed norms, under the so-called learnings from Bihar, under everything else. And I got to come back to one last thing, which is so indicative of the Election Commission's bias. I'll come back to that in a minute. But to finish this point, we will know on December 4th whether our fears were well-founded, whether the Election Commission was living in fantasy land, whether there has been large-scale exclusion of voters, because under nobody's perception do we think that the voter rolls are stuffed with, crores and crores of fake voters, right? We all agree there's something that needs to be cleansed. And I think we all can agree that the urban voter rolls have greater kind of cleansing required than the rural voter rolls. It's evident in 100 ways. I've written it in my essay a year back, I've also said that the electoral rolls need to be cleaned up. So I'm not arguing it, but there is no way that the excess is like 20%, 30%, all that is nonsense. So if by December 4th, we don't see at least 85 to 88% of the voters being entered into the computer system, that means the SIR process has failed as we worried it would.
But let
Now
me
the question
interrupt
is,
at this
will the
point.
Supreme Court act then or will it act before then? We'll find out.
Well, this is the critical question. When will the Supreme Court act? Because the truth is, when the Supreme Court was moved against the SIR exercise in Bihar, it not only refused to stop the exercise, but it still hasn't gone into the constitutional concerns that were raised. Those are still pending before the Supreme Court, and the Bihar exercise is now over. Are you not worried that when your case is heard by the Supreme Court, it will face the same response? That the exercise won't be stopped, your concerns may be addressed to the extent that the Supreme Court is willing to do so by making the procedure easier and less cumbersome, but the big constitutional concerns will be ignored or kicked down the road. Aren't you worried about that?
Again, I don't have an official position. The party has this view. I would say that history shows us such fears have been realized multiple times, particularly in the last 5-7 years. There are any number of cases of serious constitutional and long-term consequences to the nature of our democracy that have basically been heard and not judged for years or not delivered for years.
So you're
or
resigned that the
delivered in
same
a
thing
way.
will happen again. You're resigned.
I'm just saying. I just note the history. I don't, when there's life, there's hope. Maybe something will happen. But I want to go back to my point, if you don't mind. The most egregious example of one-sided bias in this election commission has happened in the last few days. Till the last few days, one of the requirements for you to be a booth level agent of your party in a booth was that you must have a vote registered in that booth. That's a basic tenet, right? To be a booth level agent, you must be a voter in that booth. This has been the case as far back as I think the system exists. It makes sense in every way because I can tell who are my neighbors can tell who I am. I can sit there at the day of polling and validate that they are who they say they are. There's 100 reasons why it makes sense. It is, eminently logical and kind of appropriate. For the first time, suddenly the Election Commission has notified that actually you don't have to have a vote in that booth at all. You can still be the booth agent for that booth. Now, this causes great concerns. When I'm out on the, in the constituency talking to my party kind of officers, they say this could open the door for all kinds of rowdy elements to be registered by some party into this booth where they don't have any locus standi, they don't have a house, they're not listed in the voter list, and they come here and start threatening people and doing all kinds of strange things. Now, of course, again, we have, it is a state government, so we have the police and all that. So I've tried to kind of assuage their fears. But why was this rule brought and why is it one-sided? Because the weakest party in Tamil Nadu from a booth agent perspective is the BJP. Both the DMK and the ADMK have been doing this for decades, and we have full staffing. You can look at the data presented by them. I think 99% plus booths are staffed properly, and the remaining will be take out today, put back tomorrow. The BJP was at like 12 or 15%. And therefore, they needed the amendment so that they could bring people from other booths to come and be booth agents in the booths they don't have people. This is, again, the extreme example of one-sided change of rules mid-process.
Mr. Thiagarajan, in a very real sense, you're proving why I'm asking you a question about how confident are you that the Supreme Court will give you relief. This concern that you've just enumerated underlines the fact that the system is likely to be unfair, it's likely to be prejudiced, its intent is under question. And yet the point is you're not confident of getting relief from the Supreme Court. Your answers, I know, weren't given as spokesman of the party. But the one thing you couldn't say to me was, I am very confident the Supreme Court will find in our favor. You can't be, because it didn't find in favor of people who petitioned it at the time when Bihar was going through an SIR exercise. It's unlikely to do so now again.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Karan, I think the great luxury of, my life has been that I've seen a lot of the world before I came to public life, though I come from a family that has been in public life for a long time. I spent almost 30 years, doing other things in other places and as an expat, getting other fields and all. So I tend to have this broader perspective, at least in these instances. And if I have to start from that perspective, I would say one of the biggest concerns I have is that the quality of democracy and the quality of kind of the facets of democracy, the artifacts of democracy, are eroding so rapidly. And primary among those is the notion of independent institutions. Now, this is a well-established link in almost all developmental economics, and increasingly so in the last few years, that there is a very strong correlation between the independence and strength of institutions, and therefore the likelihood of a level playing field, whether that's in elections or in business activities or in the judicial system, and good economic outcomes, good growth rates, and sustained kind of social harmony and development.
Okay.
It is also true these days that the reverse is happening all over the world, particularly in the so-called OECD or developed countries, not all of them, but many of them, that you are starting to see a decay of the institutions. You're starting to see those institutions behave like what once used to be called, tin pot dictatorship country or banana republic institutions. They're starting to see them become partisan, one-sided, and incompetent. And you're starting to see the quality of society and
But
economic
none of that
activity
is
and
going to help
development
you in
today,
Tamil Nadu. It's a very eloquent
right?
explanation, but it still leaves you facing the fact that the Supreme Court is unlikely to do anything.
Yeah, listen, you can't put words in my mouth. I'm saying that I see the broader context and I see things failing all over. And it deeply concerns me as a citizen that this country has started to lose all independent institutions. Broadly speaking, the independence of the courts, the
Okay.
independence of the Election Commission, of the Reserve Bank, of the regulators, of anybody, of SEBI, when they were investigating crony capitalism and insider dealing, all of them have started to erode into meaningless, one-sided partisan activity. Therefore, I worry about the future of the country. If you
Okay.
ask me, what is that relative to SIR? I say, I know that it is in this context of greater decay that I am fighting this uphill battle. I am an elected representative. It is my primary duty to protect the rights of my voters. I'm on the ground doing it as actively as I can. And what I'm trying to say in the last kind of resort is that I have greater faith in the people than I have in the court. Let me put it in a different way.
Very
If at
quickly.
the end of December 4th list, the gap is huge, everybody in their right mind will know that the exercise has been an utter failure and a flop. Surely after that, at least the court will have to act. Surely after that, at least the election commission will have to give greater time. I don't see the election commission, even in our decayed and distressed democracy, being capable of saying that at the end of phase one, only 60% of the voters were able to get their papers registered. I'm still going to go ahead with this as the basis for election. If that is the case, we have no hope left. Then what is left? If the Supreme Court doesn't step in even then what is left? There's no hope.
Well, chances are the Supreme Court won't step in even then, because the Supreme Court
I won't
hasn't
predict
stepped
that. I
in
would
as
say
yet.
surely at some point the court will have to step in. I think that I haven't yet given up that much hope. I'm
All right.
saying if the exclusion is gross,
That
if the
reminds me
exclusion is
of
gross, like let's
Nadezhda
look at Bihar for
Mandelstam,
example.
who wrote
Let's
a
look at Bihar for
biography of her
example.
husband called Hope Against Hope. And that's precisely what it is in your case too. Hope against
No. I'm
hope.
not saying that. I'm saying I have greater hope than that by a lot. I'm saying let's even look at Bihar. What is the Bihar total count? About 7.6 crores. What was the exclusion? About 65 lakhs, about 8%. After that, the court still acted and said that you can use Aadhaar and all that, and they were still able to bring back about 25 lakhs. So my net point is that even in a decayed and distressed democracy, surely there are some like live wires that nobody will touch. I don't think even the Supreme Court will allow an election commission process that disenfranchises significant proportions of the voter and still allow the election to happen. I still have that hope, and I won't call it hope against hope. That is a live hope. If you
Okay.
ask me, do I think the Supreme Court will act in time? Do I think they will act 100% fairly? Do I think they will hold the government to account? Do I think they will give judgments that are very robust and and further democracy. Maybe, maybe not. If you ask me, will they prevent large-scale disenfranchisement of voters in Tamil Nadu? Yes, I have that hope still.
Let's at this point change subjects. I want to ask you a couple of questions about the advisory opinion the Supreme Court delivered yesterday about its own judgment of April when it said that governors cannot sit endlessly on legislation. That was the case brought by your government to the Supreme Court in April. The two-bench judgment found in your favor. Now this advisory opinion has substantially reversed what the two-judge bench found. So first, let me ask you, how do you respond to the advisory opinion you heard yesterday?
I refer you to my earlier comments about the quality of the functioning of the Supreme Court. And I don't have anything more to say. It is disappointing. It reverses what I thought was a ray of hope. In any democracy, no individual should be above the rule of law. No individual should have the right to sit on bills indefinitely. They kind of use those words in the judgment, but then they kind of say that you also don't have the capacity to put a time limit. So effectively, whatever glimmer of hope I had seen in the notion of strong institutions and the restitution of democratic kind of norms, that has been erased by this judgment. And it is, it's a spaghetti judgment. On the one hand, it says you can't sit on it indefinitely. On the other hand, it says, but we can't put a time frame. Then what is the definition of indefinite? I don't know.
Well, let me point out two areas where this Supreme Court advisory of yesterday has gone contrary to the judgment of April, which you considered a great victory in your state. First of all, the advisory says there cannot be a deadline imposed upon the president or the governors for deciding how they tackle and handle legislation. That was your main case. You wanted a deadline. You wanted the matter speeded up and handled effectively and efficiently. That has been removed.
Yeah, that's what I just said. I said if there is no timeline, then what is the point? Yeah.
The second problem is the question of deemed assent. The advisory has concluded that deemed assent is alien to the constitutional structure. It also breaches what the Supreme Court considers the separation of powers. Where does that leave the 10 Tamil Nadu laws, which were deemed to have got assent after the April judgment and even have been notified in your Gazette? Where do they stand now?
Yeah, I will leave that for the lawyers to opine. But just so you know, those laws were eventually stayed by the Madras High Court anyway because of other reasons. They said there were lacunae in the drafting of the laws. So I don't think there's an immediate huge impact because those deemed assent laws and notifications were effectively stayed and not. It was stayed, in fact, ironically, by a vacation bench, which is a bit startling, but it is what it is.
But now
And
there is
so
an
I'm
argument to
not going to
say
put
that
another
the
way.
deemed
Put
assent
another
is
way. The
void.
long-term consequences for democracy, of course, are profound and disheartening to me. And the glimmer of hope that I said I saw has been wiped out. I agree. These particular laws, they've already stayed, so I don't think it changes that much.
How much hope do you take? How much comfort do you take from the fact that after saying all of this, the Supreme Court in its advisory also said that governors and the president have to handle legislation within what they called a reasonable time frame. They didn't specify what reasonable was, but they did say that if it was prolonged and indefinite, they could exercise what they called a limited mandamus to encourage the president or the governor to do it reasonably expeditiously. How much comfort do you take from that?
A little more than zero. Yeah. Yeah. I put it another way. We have seen so many of these judgments. Again, I go back. Democracy is decaying. Nobody wants to speak truth to power. Everybody is hedging their bets. They're creating these spaghetti kind of situations. You remember the electoral bond judgment. If electoral bonds are illegal, how do parties get to retain? All parties, the hundreds of thousands of crores they've collected. And what was the consequence of justice delayed when the case sat for years and years between when the bonds were introduced and then the judgment came? So I'm saying, I say this, maybe I always thought of myself as a kind of driven and kind of young person with still a lot of kind of vigor. And the system has started to wear me down. I've started to think about this in the sense that Of course, these are long-term, hugely hurtful to our country. They are hurtful to society. They are hurtful to the notion of the future of our children. This kind of decay, this kind of one-sidedness, this kind of capture of power by one party or one set of people is doomed to be negative. There are no superhumans. There are no gods here
I
sitting
take
in
your
these
point
offices.
completely. Let me
But the
point.
point is, but the point is, then the people elect the government. I mean, who are you and I? Do we think we are intellectuals that we should be second guessing the people? The people elect the government. The people get the government and the outcomes they deserve. I don't know what else to say.
But let me put this to you. Everything that you said about the advisory opinion centers around the first things you said when you began talking about it, that it's disappointing, that you feel it has reversed a central precedent set by the April judgment. And yet, Mr. Elangovan, your colleague in your party, has called this a good judgment.
Yeah, again, I'm not an official spokesperson. I think he's the official spokesperson. So you must take that as my party's view and take this as, still a free country. I'm still allowed a view as a human being. Take it as my view.
In which case, let me end by asking you this. Do you believe the advisory opinion given yesterday is a setback for not just your government, but all state governments, and in particular, opposition state governments, where you have an intrusive governor sitting over your head? Is it a setback for all of you?
Well, relative to the judgment that we had before, obviously, because the last judgment had a clear timeline. And we benefited from that timeline. Certain other bills, and forget the original 10, certain other bills had to be passed or moved on, and then the governor was kind of adhering to that. So now, of course, he can go back to his usual obfuscation and do nothing. Now in this case, anyway, we're within a few months of election, so it's unlikely to be much legislation. But in the immediate effect, of course, the removal of a deadline or a timeline is a negative. It allows more interference of unelected people to do kind of thwarting the will of the people of the elected legislature.
Mr. Thiagarajan,
I
thank
mean,
you
that's just
very much.
logic. That's not a party position. That's just logic. That's just like clarity, right?
Thank you very much for the time you've given me. Thank you very much for talking about both the issues I wanted to raise. The original issue being the SIR exercise, and the new issue, which I, in a sense, hit you with without much warning, the special advisory opinion given by the Supreme Court yesterday. I'm very grateful to you. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.